In one ancient Greek kingdom, at a time when the gods still roamed among mortals, 3 beautiful princesses dreamed what their future husbands would look like.
Mine will be very rich and will cover me with the finest silk and the most beautiful jewels. My husband will be a famous general, and he will show me as his most remarkable achievement. And you, Psyche, what will your husband look like? All I want is a love that will lift my spirit. So cheesy.
The 2 sisters were beautiful, but Psyche was certainly the most beautiful. So beautiful that she attracted everyone's eyes, making her sisters jealous. People from faraway kingdoms traveled long distances just to gaze at the famous princess. "Behold, the most beautiful creature who ever set foot on earth!" Psyche was worshipped as a true deity, and the tributes previously paid to Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, were now addressed to the young and beautiful princess. The offended goddess, caught in anger, watched the parade that followed the princess, while her temple was empty. Aphrodite gathered her son, Eros, the god of love and passion.
Dear son, this mortal who thinks she is on the same level as the gods must be punished. Through your arrows, make Psyche fall in love with the hideous creature.
As night fell, Eros went to the royal palace and stealthily entered Psyche's room. Psyche was sleeping in her bed. Curiously, Eros approached the princess to see if she was really that beautiful. The god was overwhelmed, as the beauty of Psyche was truly splendid.
The fact that my mother is jealous of this mortal being is no coincidence. Her beauty can eclipse the most beautiful among the nymphs and goddess.
In an unexpected turn of events, Psyche turned in her sleep, and this movement disoriented Eros, who accidentally wounded himself with his own weapon. The wounded god instantly fell in love with the young and beautiful mortal, and because of his love, Eros failed to accomplish the mission that would have caused harm to Psyche. Psyche carried on her life normally and did not even suspect what had happened. But there was something strange going on. Time passed, and although she was the most beautiful and most beloved, Psyche was still single, while her sisters had several suitors.
Psyche, you have always been adored by everyone, but you are still single, while our sister and I are already happily married to the noblest of men.
Don't worry, daughter of mine. Your beauty may be overwhelming to some men, but soon a suitor worthy of your heart will appear. But the king was indeed very much worried about his daughter's situation. The king was unaware that the lack of suitors was because Eros refused to awaken the love for Psyche in any man, since he was in love with the girl. He went to the Oracle of Delphi in his quest for answers. Inside, through a pythoness, the god Apollo pronounced himself.
Your daughter will marry a perverse, winged being who is delighted to wound mortals and gods. The princess shall be left on the edge of the abyss in matrimonial attire, where she shall be delivered to this terrible creature who will cause her death.
Apollo was referencing Eros, the god of love. The solar god harbored a great resentment for Eros, since he had made the god of music have non-requited loves. The king left the temple in tears, as he was resistant to the idea of losing his favorite daughter. But the envious sisters of Psyche insisted that he was to obey the orientations of the oracle.
You must sacrifice Psyche, or you will draw the ire of the gods and woe to our kingdom!
The king then revealed the sorrowful fate of his daughter. My beloved daughter, by the will of the gods we will deliver you to a terrible fate. Your beauty has become a curse. The princess was led into the abyss by a bridal procession, which resembled a funeral procession. Psyche, hearing her parents' lamentation, did not hold back.
Why do they now bemoan my fate? A short while ago they rejoiced, proudly, to see me being adored like a goddess, while they knew the sacrilege that was being perpetuated. Now carry me up the cliff, and let me meet my dismal fate.
Psyche was abandoned on the edge of the abyss in expectation of her terrible husband. A breeze started to lift Psyche towards the sky. This wind was the god Zephyr, also known as the West Wind. The princess levitated in the sky towards her destiny. After being swept away by Zephyr, Psyche awoke in an idyllic place. Flowers spread everywhere, and a delicious scent perspired the air. A beautiful palace featuring the whitest marble stood out in the landscape. Psyche climbed the stairs that led to the entrance of the palace, bewildered by all the wealth that surrounded her. The place was made of striking luxury, where there was no shortage of adornments covered in gold and silver. As she entered the palace, she heard a soft voice, but could not tell where it came from. "My lady, everything you see now belongs to you, and we are at your disposal to assist you in anything you wish." There was no one around her, but the young woman understood that these were invisible servants. They helped her in the bath, at meals, and sang and played beautiful songs. "Now you shall go to your room and wait for the arrival of our master."
And what is your master like? They say he's a monster.
Some have mentioned him that way, but in fact he's not evil, just volatile. Already in her room, Psyche, distressed, was waiting for her fate. The cloak of Nyx, the goddess of the night, had already fully clothed the skies. The room was in utter darkness, and it was impossible to see any shape, when Psyche felt that something had crept in through the window. The lady felt the presence of her new husband, and could feel his breath on her neck. The young woman was tense and had no idea what would happen. Against her expectations, she had a night of sublime pleasure, and her new husband treated her with much love and affection. When she awakened in the morning, her husband had already left, and due to the darkness of the previous night, she could not have any glimpse of her companion. Psyche spent the day getting to know the facilities of her new residence, but she kept thinking about when she would find that mysterious creature again. The night arrived, and Psyche was already waiting for her husband. The couple met and loved each other on countless nights. On one of those, Psyche couldn't resist and asked,
My love, why do you always hide in the shadows? I would so much like to know how you really are.
Isn't the love we share enough? All I'm asking is that you don't try to see me. In the darkness, we are equals.
I'm sorry if I annoyed you. That wasn't my intention.
Psyche decided to respect her husband's request and stopped touching the subject. Time passed, and despite being very happy, Psyche missed her family.
Husband of mine, I miss my family so much, and it hurts my heart to know that they think I am dead. I beg you to let me visit her.
Eros accepted Psyche's request because, according to his thoughts, if she decided to return after having been released, that would be the ultimate proof of her genuine love.
My beloved daughter, I thought I would never see you again. Psyche's relatives were surprised with the girl's return, whom they thought they would never see again. And the return was triumphant. Psyche was adorned with the most beautiful jewels. She looked like the richest of queens.
How is your life with your mysterious husband?
It couldn't be more wonderful. He is sweet and does everything to please me.
Her jealous sisters did not believe the stories Psyche told while she distributed beautiful gifts to her relatives.
Everything about our sister tends to be too much. I don't think everything she says is really that gorgeous. You don't have to believe me. Come with me, and you can see for yourself.
Zephyr, the wind from the west, led Psyche and her sisters to the heavenly palace. When they got there, they realized that everything their sister had said was true. But this only made her sisters more jealous. The envious sisters decided to poison Psyche's relationship.
I know that everything seems wonderful, but don't you remember what the oracle said? You married a monster, and he will be responsible for your death.
Do this. When you sense that he is sleeping, take a knife, turn on a light, and after seeing the monster, cut his throat!
Her sisters departed, but seeds of distrust had been planted in Psyche's heart. The night came, and her husband was already asleep beside her. The young woman took a knife and lit a lamp. As she approached her bed, Psyche realized that this was not a monster, but a young man with divine beauty. The young woman moved closer to contemplate her husband's breathtaking beauty, and concluded that he could only be a god. But a drop of hot oil accidentally fell from the lamp, and it hit Eros' chest, who awoke, frightened by the burn. And he faced Psyche, wielding the knife.
How can you be such a fool? Is this how you repay my love? Thinking that I'm a monster and wanting to slash my throat?
Forgive me, my love. I know I made a mistake, but we can make this right.
I only asked you one thing, and you couldn't do it. And so you'll never see me again.
Eros flew out the window. Psyche jumped after him but couldn't reach him, and hit the ground. The fall injuries were light, but her heart was utterly broken. When they heard that Psyche had returned, her sisters ran to the cliff, hoping that they would be blown away by the west wind. Zephyr began to blow, and the sisters threw themselves into his arms. But he did not seize them, letting them fall from the cliff. The poor Psyche began to help with the tasks of the goddess Demeter's temple. In Demeter's temple, Psyche accomplished all of her tasks with utmost dedication. But all this work was not enough to make the young woman stop thinking about her lost love. The goddess Demeter showed her pity for the poor girl and decided to help her.
Poor Psyche. I feel sorry for your pain. So I give her the following advice. Go to Aphrodite's temple and offer yourself to the goddess with humility and submission. Then you will soften the goddess's wrath, and perhaps you will be able to win back her love.
Who am I not to follow the advice of such a wise and benevolent goddess?
Psyche went to the goddess of love's temple, and she had no idea how she would be welcomed by the former mother-in-law. The young woman was met with great distrust by Aphrodite.
What is the most obnoxious and disloyal of creatures who have walked on this earth doing in my temple?
I humbly throw myself down before the goddess of love and put myself at her service in search of forgiveness.
Do you believe that you will be forgiven easily by me, after robbing my honors and hurting my son? To purge your sins will be very painful, and you will have to do the most difficult jobs, which may cost you your own life.
I will do anything to at least have a small chance to get your forgiveness and win back my love.
Aphrodite chose to burden Psyche with painful tasks. As a first assignment, Psyche would then have to go to the grain barn and separate the different varieties, which were thoroughly mixed. The difficulty of such a task would have overwhelmed even Hercules. The god Eros, who secretly observed everything, made ants help Psyche in her task. This way, the young woman accomplished her work in record time. Aphrodite was angered to see the work accomplished so quickly.
I don't know how you managed to accomplish this task so easily, but the next one won't be so straightforward.
Psyche was supposed to bring Aphrodite a good handful of golden wool from dangerous sheep. These were no ordinary animals, since, besides having the golden wool, they were also enthusiasts of human flesh. The sheep passed through a narrow trail between thorny plants, and part of their wool ended up sticking to the thorns. Psyche collected the wool that was left between the thorns and presented the golden threads to the goddess.
Well done. But do not think it's over.
The goddess of beauty then demanded that the young woman bring her a jug of water from the source of the Styx River, which is located on top of a mountain. The task was seemingly impossible to achieve, but Zeus ordered his eagle to collect the water from the source and deliver it to Psyche, and so one more job was accomplished.
I admit that you have been able to accomplish these tasks by conquering the mercy of the gods, but your next job will have a price that only you can pay. The hassle you've caused me has exhausted my beauty, so I demand you go to the kingdom of Hades and ask Queen Persephone to fill this box with beauty so I can restore my splendor. And then you shall have my forgiveness and blessing to reunite with my son again.
Psyche knew now that her end was near, and she knew of no other way to enter the underworld than to take her own life. The young woman was ready to jump from the top of a tower when she heard a voice like a ghost.
There's another way. I'll tell you the route and how you can overcome the obstacles known as Charon the ferryman and Cerberus, the three-headed dog. But when you come back, don't ever open the box in any situation.
Following the guidance of the mysterious voice, she found a cave that would take her to the underworld. After a lengthy descent, she reached the banks of the Acheron River, and there she met Charon.
I serve the goddess Aphrodite and have an audience with Queen Persephone, who awaits me.
She gave 2 coins to the boatman Charon as payment. So she crossed the River of Souls toward the domains of Hades. Psyche introduced herself to the king and queen of the underworld, Hades and Persephone.
What does a mortal do in our domains?
I'm here at the service of Aphrodite, who asks you to fill this box with some of your beauty so that she can restore hers.
Persephone gave the box back to her, which was now much heavier, and Psyche set out on her way out of the underworld. Psyche came across Cerberus, preventing her passage. However, she had taken with her, guided by the mysterious voice, barley and honey bread, soaked with a sleeping pill. She offered it to the dog, who fell asleep, and so Psyche proceeded to the surface. As the boatman made his return trip, the young woman saw her own reflection in the waters, and she noticed how all this work had made her look tired. Psyche started the ascent to the surface, and she would soon finish her last mission.
This box is nearly overflowing with beauty. It won't hurt me to take just a little bit for myself. And like this, when I find my love again, I will be beautiful and glowing for him.
Psyche opened the box, and out of it came a black mist. As she absorbed the mist, Psyche started to faint, and life began to leave her body. Eros felt that something had happened to his love and went to rescue her. When he found Psyche, she was cold as a cadaver. Thanatos, the embodiment of death, was already beside the girl's body. Using his powers, Eros lifted the mortal mist from her beloved's body and put it back in the box. Psyche awoke in Eros's arms and said,
My love, I feel now that I can finally look you in the eyes without risking losing you.
Then, the couple kissed passionately. Eros instructed Psyche to finish her work, handing the box to Aphrodite. In the meantime, the god of love flew to Mount Olympus, where he begged Zeus to convince Aphrodite to allow the couple to bond. Eros led Psyche to Mount Olympus. All the gods were waiting for her there. And from the hands of Zeus himself, and with Aphrodite's blessing, she received the nectar and ambrosia, divine foods that bestowed immortality.
Psyche, her path was thorny, but ultimately you managed to complete your quest. Now you are immortal and free from the obstacles created by men's ignorance. And the bond that binds you and your husband will never be breached, and this love will persist for all eternity.
From the union of Eros and Psyche was born Hedon, the deity of pleasure, and the love of the couple lasted forever. Apollo established himself as one of the most important deities on Olympus after exterminating the fearsome serpent Python. The god paraded around with his bow and arrows, brimming with pride. This weapon is one of his symbols. The archer god found Eros, the god of love, training his aim. Despite his childlike figure, he had an elegant and noble bearing with his bow. Feeling jealous of the boy god, who majestically handled the bow, Apollo decided to mock Eros's talent. "Hey boy, what do you think you are doing handling that noble instrument so carelessly? Don't you know why the whole world refers to the bow as Apollo's weapon? With it, I defeated the most terrible of monsters." Eros didn't give in to the provocations. He turned his back on Apollo and started to walk away, but the sun god continued his provocations. "That's right, walk away. With your lousy aim, you'll never achieve a feat like mine." Apollo's offense exceeded the patience of the god of love. He waited for Apollo to turn around and quickly took one of his golden arrows, and he fired his weapon, striking the heart of the god Apollo, who fell to his knees. Eros had never defeated a great monster before, but he had just brought down one of the most powerful gods to his knees. His arrow did not physically wound the god, but Apollo was under the full influence of love. After recovering, the solar god met a beautiful nymph. Her name was Daphne, daughter of Peneus, a river god. Apollo immediately fell in love with the young woman, but Eros had not yet completed the lesson he wanted to teach the god. He shot a lead arrow and struck Daphne's heart, causing her to feel repulsion from Apollo. The god of light tried to approach the nymph, but she immediately turned away. "Why do you run away from me? Don't you see that I am the god Apollo, the god of beauty, music, and prophecy?" said Apollo, full of pride. "Your figure disgusts me. Don't come near me. I'd rather give myself up to a disgusting satyr." However, Apollo could not resist the powers of passion and tried to approach the nymph. She attempted to run away, but Apollo pursued her. When the god was about to catch up with her, the nymph ran into the water of her father's river and said, "Father, please, I beg you. I am tired of running away. Take away my beauty, as it is becoming a real curse." Peneus, the river god, helped his daughter. The moment Apollo grabbed her, Daphne began to transform into a tree. Daphne had turned into a tree, and the desolate Apollo was kissing and hugging the tree-shaped nymph. And as he tried to grab the nymph's hair, only laurel leaves remained in his hands. Daphne had turned into a laurel tree. Resigned, Apollo said, "I was denied the opportunity to love you, but from this day forward you will be my sacred plant. With your leaves I will make a laurel wreath, which I will wear and allow to those who triumph." And from that day on, the laurel wreath became a symbol of glory. Apollo would deeply regret having had a disagreement with the god of love. After that day, Apollo was no longer lucky in love. The Greek world was full of musicians and poets who sang the deeds of gods and heroes, but none of them could compare to Orpheus. He was the son of the muse Calliope and the god Apollo. From his mother, he inherited an unsurpassed melodious voice, and from his father, a talent for writing outstanding music. When he played his lyre offered by Apollo, the animals would calm down and stop to listen to him, and even the plants would swing to the music's rhythm. But Orpheus was not only a virtuous artist, he was also endowed with great courage. The young man was part of the Jason crew in his quest for the Golden Fleece. Thanks to Orpheus, the Argonauts escaped the seductive siren's song, since the hero managed to muffle the deadly melody of sea creatures with his own music. After returning from the adventure, Orpheus met the beautiful Eurydice, falling in love. Eurydice was the biggest fan of Orpheus's songs. The young lady's passion for the songs often made him jealous of his own compositions. During the couple's marriage, dark omens pointed to a turbulent future. But nevertheless, the couple decided to live out their days as best they could. One day, while Eurydice was walking through the fields, she was spotted by Aristaeus, the beekeeper. The young woman ran away from the man who wanted to rape her, but she encountered her sad fate. In her escape through the grass, the unfortunate girl was stung by a snake. Eurydice failed to take many steps and fell to the ground. Upon hearing the news, Orpheus ran to meet his beloved. The young woman died in the arms of her lover before departing for the kingdom of Hades. With her beloved's body in his arms and making use of his powerful voice, Orpheus cried out the saddest lamentation of all. The happiness in his songs disappeared, and from that day on, only dismal and melancholic sounds came out of his lyre. The unhappy Orpheus turned to Zeus, the supreme Olympian god, asking him to bring his beloved wife back to life. Zeus said he could not interfere in the affairs of his brother Hades, but Orpheus could go to the world of the dead to converse with the god of the underworld, with Hermes by his side. Along with the messenger god, Orpheus descended to the world of the dead. With his melodious verses, the young man softened the heart of the boatman Charon, who agreed to make his crossing over the river of the dead. At the gates of the underworld was Cerberus, Hades' three-headed dog, responsible for stopping intruders from entering his master's domain. Orpheus played his lyre and sang him a quiet song that made the dog fall asleep. Hades and his wife Persephone were surprised by Orpheus's presence in their domains. Enraged, the god said, "How dare you invade my domains, mortal creature? You shall tell me your motivation, or you will suffer in Tartarus for all eternity." "I'm begging you to allow me to return to the world of the living with my beloved Eurydice." Orpheus sang a sad song, and the boy's pain was tremendously felt by all. While Orpheus played his lyre, the world of the dead stopped to listen to him. Sisyphus stopped rolling his stone, and for a moment, the Furies forgot to punish sinners and thieves. Everyone was stunned by Orpheus. Hades was moved by Orpheus's music to the point of shedding an iron tear. Queen Persephone interceded for Orpheus, and Hades asked for Eurydice to be brought to their presence. The couple's reunion moved everyone. That's when Hades spoke.
You two are free to go, but you must go ahead, and Eurydice will go right behind you, and under no circumstances can you look back. Otherwise, you will lose her again.
A dark path emerged from the underground to the surface, and the couple set out for the world of the living. Orpheus walked all the way back, feeling concerned, because he was not sure if Eurydice could keep up with him. When he was almost at the end of the tunnel, and the sunlight was already hitting his eyes, Orpheus couldn't contain himself and looked back to make sure his beloved was there. But at that very same instant, Eurydice was pulled back into the world of the dead. Orpheus still attempted to hold his beloved's hand, but it was too late. Orpheus was desperate and wanted to return to the underworld, but Hermes stopped him. The desolate Orpheus sank into a terrible depression, and his music never rejoiced again. Sometime later, he was found by a group of Bacchantes, the Dionysus's priestesses, who wished to sleep with the young man, but he could only play and sing his sad songs. Enraged, the Bacchantes threw stones at Orpheus, but the power of his music dodged them. The Bacchantes decided to muffle the music with bells, screams, and drums. No longer protected by the music, Orpheus was killed and pierced by the Bacchantes. His remains, along with his lyre, were thrown into the river. The dismayed muses picked his divine lyre and honored him by turning it into a constellation. Despite his sad end, Orpheus's spirit was free to meet his beloved Eurydice in the Champs-Élysées. Ceyx reigned over Thessaly, and he was a good ruler. With him, Thessaly went through a period of peace and prosperity. The king was married with Alcyone, his beloved and devoted wife. But the king was quite dismayed due to several mishaps that his kingdom was experiencing, which included his brother's death. Ceyx started to believe that his kingdom no longer counted with the gods' benevolence, and therefore, he made the decision to travel to the Oracle of Delphi, looking for answers. To reach the Oracle, the king would have to go through a morose and sometimes dangerous sea journey. Knowing her husband's plan, Alcyone experienced an ominous sign and begged him to relinquish the idea, or at least to take her with him. But Ceyx didn't mind his wife's pleas. Although he didn't want to leave his beloved partner behind, he also didn't want to put her at risk. He promised to Alcyone that he would be back in 2 weeks at most. The king embarked and waved at his beloved wife, who, with teary eyes, waved back. Initially, the journey was quiet, but the weather quickly shifted, and the sailors were hit by a powerful storm. Ceyx's vessel was swallowed by the tides, and the king was engulfed by the sea, along with his ship. His last thoughts were about his wife and his promise of returning to her, which would never be fulfilled. Alcyone spent every day praying to the gods for a safe return of her husband, unaware of the tragedy that struck him. The return deadline had already expired, and Alcyone began to pray even more and making offerings, especially to the goddess Hera, which is the protective goddess of marriages and couples. The goddess, witnessing the queen's grief due to her missing husband, decided to act. Hera called the goddess Iris, her faithful messenger, and ordered her to meet Morpheus, the god of dreams. She wanted to have him convey her message as a dream. Iris stepped into the dark cave where the god of dreams slept. The brightness of the goddess's colored rainbow lights woke up the god, and, after delivering the message, the goddess went away. Hypnos, the god of sleep, ordered his son Morpheus to shape himself like Ceyx and visit Alcyone in her dreams, fulfilling Hera's command. Morpheus visited Alcyone in her sleep. She saw her husband, and he appeared pale, with a saddened face, as well as wet hair and clothes. And what seemed like her husband's ghost told her, "I come to reveal my sad fate. I went overboard, and my life was prematurely interrupted. Weep and mourn for me, because I will not come back to life to fulfill my promise." Alcyone threw herself at the ghost's feet and pleaded him not to go away, and when she tried to grab his legs, he vanished. And so the queen woke from her dream and was sure that her husband would never make it back. Alcyone went to the beach, the same place where she had seen her beloved man for the last time. That's when she spotted a floating body, and Alcyone immediately recognized Ceyx. Desperate, she jumped into the sea to reach her husband, despite not knowing how to swim. Alcyone was about to drown. Her life was also coming to an abrupt end. That was when the gods levitated her body, and the queen was turned into a beautiful bird. But even as a bird, she still wept for the loss of her love. Then she flew up to her husband's body and kissed him. Ceyx then reborn as a bird as well. And together, the couple of birds conquered the air. From that day, once a year for 7 days, the Greek seas calm down, a sign that Alcyone and Ceyx are returning to hatch their eggs. Pygmalion was a sculptor with unique skills. His works were admired all over the world. The sculptor traveled to the island of Cyprus because there he would have access to marble with such quality that his works would appear to be made of ivory. Pygmalion was very demanding and was looking for a woman to be his wife, but he could only see faults in all women, so he opted for celibacy. A large block of marble was delivered to his workshop. The sculptor, when observing the raw stone, saw in it all the necessary qualities to make his masterpiece. He decided to make the statue of a woman, but not like a woman like the ones he saw in the streets. For him, they were vulgar and extremely flawed. Pygmalion prepared himself to make a perfect woman, young, beautiful, and virginal. But on the island of Cyprus, there wasn't a woman to serve as a model. So the artist got from his imagination the inspiration to create such a woman, and he started working. For a long time, Pygmalion dedicated himself exclusively to what would be his masterpiece. The sculptor devoted himself to every detail of his work, and the result was perfect. He had produced the most beautiful statue that had ever been sculpted. Pygmalion was delighted with his own work and named it Galatea. The statue was so perfect that the artist sometimes touched it to make sure it was not a real woman. The sculptor was in love with his own work. He caressed her face and dressed her in the purest silk. His love for the statue was so much that he even put it on his bed to sleep next to him. The day of the festival that celebrated the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of love, arrived. Pygmalion realized he was obsessed with Galatea, his beloved of marble and ivory. Pygmalion went to the temple to pay his due respects to the goddess. After making an offer to the goddess, Pygmalion asked her, "Goddess Aphrodite, I know I tried to avoid love at all costs, but I never intended to offend you. Now I'm here, prostrated before your temple, overwhelmed by the power of love, and I ask you for a wife like my ivory girl." The goddess Aphrodite was touched by the passionate artist's plea. Pygmalion returned home and found the statue of his beloved Galatea. The sculptor put his hands on her cheek and kissed her on the lips. At that moment, he felt the warmth and softness of his beloved's lips. Her body was no longer rigid like stone, and she gave in to the grip of his arms. Aphrodite had transformed the marble statue into a real woman. And, under the blessing of the goddess of love, Pygmalion and Galatea got married. From this union was born Paphos, who would one day found a city in honor of Aphrodite.
The history of ancient Greece is filled with heroes who encountered great challenges and took part in remarkable adventures. Many heroes had tragic ends, but others managed to return triumphantly and keep going with their lives. Admetus was one of those fortunate heroes who returned home to reign over Thessaly. He was one of the Argonauts who set out in search of the Golden Fleece, and, due to an unusual feat, he managed to marry the beautiful princess Alcestis. The couple lived happily, and the royal house of Thessaly prospered along with their kingdom. Admetus, Alcestis, and their offspring were loved by their people, and that happiness seemed to never end. However, one day, Admetus was taken by a sudden malaise. He felt the dreadful touch of Thanatos, the god of death. The king lost his strength and fainted in the arms of his beloved Alcestis. During the night, while the king was attempting to recover from this malaise, Admetus received an unexpected visit. They were the ladies of destiny, who had appeared in his room with dismaying news. The Moirai were responsible for concatenating the destiny of all beings, and they revealed that the king had little time left to live, and that death was already around the corner. Admetus fell on the ground in despair and grabbed the goddess's garments, begging for his life. He said he was still very young and feared for the fate of his family. The Moirai remained unfazed. The king's life was literally hanging by a thread, but Admetus had a last resort. In the past, the king had welcomed the god Apollo into his palace when he disagreed with Zeus, and so the luminous god owed a debt of gratitude to Admetus. Apollo interceded for the king, and the Moirai opened an exception. They said that the king could remain alive so long as someone, free willingly, surrendered his life in the king's place. The king felt relieved because many had told him they were willing to give their own lives for him. But when he went to his subjects to look for a volunteer, he found none. Then he turned to those he thought would never abandon him. The king asked if any of his old parents would sacrifice for his son, but they were still very attached to the time they had left. The dismayed king started crying, and could hardly believe his end was coming. It was then that Alcestis, his wife, said she would sacrifice herself in his place. In the name of her love for her husband, the young woman said she would give up on her life provided the king swore that, after her departure, he would protect the rights of her children from an evil stepmother. Embarrassed, the king accepted the sacrifice of her love for the good of their offspring and his kingdom. And the evils that afflicted Admetus moved onto the brave queen. Alcestis, already sick, was bedridden waiting for the inevitable visit paid by Thanatos. While Admetus was crying over his wife's imminent departure, a commotion started in the city. The mighty Hercules had arrived, the great hero who was still performing his 12 outstanding labors. But he had already achieved notoriety for defeating frightful monsters and villains. The son of Zeus asked to be lodged in Admetus' palace, and he welcomed him with all the honor that a son of Zeus deserved. Hercules had a delicious feast and was served with the finest regional wines. Then, the hero felt the palace's funeral atmosphere and noticed the sadness of Admetus and his servants. Hercules asked the reason why, and Admetus explained the whole situation. The hero was moved by the king's account, and he felt deeply honored to be so solemnly received even in such a painful moment. This showed that the king appreciated the duty of hospitality imposed by Zeus. The son of the supreme god assured Admetus that he would not allow the god of death to take his wife's spirit, so he stood beside Alcestis' bed like a watchdog. The night arrived, and with it came the beautiful but ominous Thanatos. The dark god was surprised by the hero's presence and demanded Hercules to step away, because Charon was waiting for Alcestis' arrival to cross the world of the dead. But Hercules said that Thanatos could only touch Alcestis if he managed to defeat him. This is a laughable threat to the god of death. And the two began to fight. The hero confronted death itself, something unfeasible for a common mortal being. But the hero was a demigod, and the strength of Zeus's blood flowed stronger in him than any of his human descendants. Thanatos succumbed to the power of the son of Zeus, and, under the threat of the demigod, the god saw no alternative but to escape. With Thanatos fleeing, the health of the brave Queen Alcestis was restored. Thanks to Hercules, the love of the couple prevailed over death.
On Mount Olympus, a young deity paraded herself. She was the goddess of spring, and her youthful beauty enchanted the male deities. Her name was Cora, but she would become better known as Persephone. Demeter, her mother, was overprotective and shielded the young girl from the Olympic gods. She wanted her daughter to maintain her purity and virginity, as did the goddesses Athena, Artemis, and Hestia. So the goddess of agriculture kept Aphrodite and her son Eros away from her daughter. The divinities of love did not want to have another divinity in Olympus immune to their influence, and planned a way to attack the young goddess. Far from Olympus, in the depths of the earth, there was another god who lived free from the influence of the gods of love. His name was Hades, the lord of the underworld. The endless tasks of managing his kingdom allowed Hades to think of nothing else but his work. But a great tremor disturbed the kingdom of Hades, which rose to the surface to see what was happening. The Etna volcano was erupting, a sign that Typhon, the monster imprisoned by Zeus, was especially unhappy. That's when the god heard a sweet voice coming from a nearby forest. In the woods, Persephone sang without realizing that anyone was watching her. Aphrodite and Eros noticed Hades' interest in Persephone and wanted to take the opportunity. The god of passion and love fulminated the heart of the god with one of his golden arrows, which instilled desire and passion in the hearts of men and gods. Consumed by passion, Hades approached the spring goddess, who did not feel his approach. Hades tried to flirt with the young woman, but she resisted. Impetuously, Hades grabbed his beloved, and the earth opened so that he could return to his domain. With the goddess in his arms, the god of the dead descended through a tunnel into his kingdom. Persephone was very agitated and was locked in a room of Hades' palace until she became calmer. Hades declared his love for Persephone, who, although she felt attracted by the god, was still trying to push him away. Demeter started to get distressed because she didn't know where her daughter was, so she wandered the world in search of Persephone. After much searching, she found one of the nymphs who used to accompany her daughter. She told her how Hades kidnapped the girl, taking her to the underworld when the earth opened. Demeter was furious and would not forgive Gaia, the goddess of the earth, who had been an accomplice to her daughter's abduction when she opened up. As goddess of agriculture, Demeter was responsible for soil fertility. To punish Gaia, she decided to make the land infertile. The goddess cried because she missed her daughter, and, due to the great sadness she felt, she started to neglect her tasks. Zeus started to worry about the situation of the planet, because if Demeter didn't perform her tasks again, chaos would take over the world. The great god tried to convince Demeter to return to her tasks, but she said that the world would remain infertile until she had her daughter back. Zeus assured that Persephone would be freed from the underworld unless she had fed on some fruit from the underworld. At Zeus's request, Hermes guided Demeter to the underworld. After all, he was the conductor of souls, knowing the intricate ways that lead to the kingdom of Hades. The goddess met her daughter at the very moment she was eating pomegranate seeds offered by the lord of the underworld. After eating the fruit, Persephone metamorphosed and became the queen of the underworld. Demeter rebuked her daughter for agreeing to eat the food offered by such an evil being. Persephone said that her husband was not so bad. He treated her with respect and genuinely loved her. On top of everything else, there she would be a true queen. Demeter's heart felt an intense pain, and she started crying. Moved by his mother-in-law's sadness, Hades proposed a deal. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld, and the other part with his mother on the surface. Once the deal was sealed, Persephone returned to the surface with her mother. In the ground, which was infertile, many flowers sprouted. The harvests were chock full again. But the meeting period between Persephone and Demeter ran out, and the young goddess returned to the underworld to see her husband again. Demeter was desolate to see her daughter leave, and, depressed, she neglected her tasks again. But when mother and daughter met again, the world flourished once more, and so the seasons were born. Adonis was a beautiful young hunter. While wandering the woods in search of his prey, the young man was worshipped by the flower nymphs. His beauty was so striking that he looked like a god. One day, Adonis's beauty even drew Aphrodite's attention. The goddess of beauty and love, who was playing in the forest with her son Eros, sharpening his arrows. The goddess was delighted with the young man and began to praise him to her son. Eros grew angry due to jealousy and turned his back on his mother while continuing to sharpen his golden arrows. Aphrodite said that Eros should not be jealous as to her. He would always be the most beautiful. She hugged him to comfort him, but accidentally ended up injuring herself on the arrow that Eros was holding. And so Aphrodite fell in love with Adonis. The goddess was spying the beautiful young man, and she could not resist his charms and succumbed to passion. Aphrodite asked the young man who he was, since his beauty was so wonderful that he resembled a god. Adonis knew that this lovely woman could only be Aphrodite, the goddess of love. He said that he was not a god, but a mere mortal. Aphrodite was intrigued because she didn't know that a man could be almost as perfect as a god. Aphrodite drew closer with such a seductive look that no god, much less a mortal, could resist. The couple kissed and began to see each other regularly. These were days of passionate love. On a spring day, Persephone, the queen of the underworld, was wandering through the woods and stumbled upon the loving couple. She was delighted with what she saw. But she did not know that Eros, the god of love, was ready to pull another one of his pranks. He shot her with one of his arrows. The queen was now also in love with the boy, and decided that Aphrodite should enjoy it while she could, because one day the beautiful boy would be hers. Aphrodite was overzealous of Adonis, fearing that the young and daring hunter would injure himself on his hunts, but he kept telling her not to worry, because he was very experienced and promised not to take any chances. However, apart from Aphrodite and Persephone, there was one more god who was keeping an eye on the boy. His name was Ares, the god of war, who was Aphrodite's lover and therefore bore a great hatred for his rival. Ares knew that the young man's love for hunting rivaled his love for Aphrodite, and so plotted his revenge. Adonis roamed the woods in search of yet another prey when he stumbled upon a mighty boar. Ares stirred up the young man's bloodlust. He ended up forgetting the promise he made to the goddess of not risking himself needlessly. Adonis chose to fight the beast and managed to wound it. But Ares inflated the beast's heart with unbridled fury. The boar decided not to flee to preserve its life, but to furiously charge Adonis. He drove its powerful tusks into his abdomen. Adonis was mortally wounded. Aphrodite came running to his aid, but there was nothing more she could do. He died in her arms. She buried him, and upon his tomb grew beautiful red flowers that were named Adonis. As one goddess wept, another in the underworld was beaming and waiting for the arrival of the most beautiful man who ever lived. The powerless goddess of love watched the arrival of Hermes, who was there to lead Adonis's soul to Hades' realm. In the netherworld, Queen Persephone eagerly awaited the arrival of the most beautiful man in the world, for whom she cherished a great passion sparked by Eros' arrow. Adonis was welcomed in the underworld by specters, who treated him with great honors. The boy was surprised at such a reception. He had no idea of the love that the queen of the underworld had for him. Persephone's loyal specters lodged the boy in a special room in the royal palace. While Hades, the underworld lord, was asleep, his queen broke into her guest's chamber. The beautiful goddess cornered the young boy, but he tried to dodge her. He dreaded Hades' revenge, but the goddess told him not to worry. If he didn't tell the god, she wouldn't tell him either. With no way out, he gave in to the goddess's lust. The sneaky encounters continued day after day. Aphrodite longed for her lover and promptly decided to go down to the Hades realm and rescue her sweetheart. She found Adonis there serving the underworld gods and said she was there to bring her beloved Adonis back to the surface. Hades, however, was aggrieved to see the goddess of love invading his kingdom and making demands. Hades told her that he did not care for Aphrodite's will. He appreciated the services rendered by Adonis, and he would remain in the underworld forever. But Aphrodite threatened to extinguish all love from the face of the earth. Only bitterness and grudge would remain between the couples. Hades ousted Aphrodite from his kingdom. She left in tears, but her threats were not empty. Throughout the world, love between couples began to dwindle. The relationship between Zeus and the goddess Hera, usually strained, was becoming unbearable. Zeus decided that something had to be done. He called for a meeting with Hades, Persephone, and Aphrodite, saying that the whole situation couldn't go on. He suggested Hades take possession of Adonis, just like the agreement he had made with the goddess Demeter. For a third of the year, he would stay in the underworld. The next third he would spend on the surface with Aphrodite, and the young man would have a third to enjoy in any way he wished. Hades took issue with Zeus's intrusion into matters of his kingdom, But knowing that Adonis was Persephone's favorite servant, he said he would not accept such an offer. To Hades' surprise, however, Persephone replied that, if it was for the good of all, she would allow Adonis to resurface and return to her husband's kingdom only when winter was approaching. Baffled, Hades did not understand why Persephone would release Adonis without putting up a fight. Spring arrived and Adonis departed to meet his lover Aphrodite. But summer meant that the goddess had to leave him. Hades had not anticipated summer is also the time that Persephone comes out of the underworld to find her mother, the goddess Demeter. And during the summer, Adonis and Persephone loved each other without bothering about being caught by the underworld king. But the quarrel between Persephone and Aphrodite remained. They always sought to maximize the length of their relationship with Adonis. This is why in some years the winter seems longer or the heat of summer persists. The love story of Hades and Persephone is one of Greek mythology's most famous. You have certainly heard the story that the god kidnapped her, which gave rise to the seasons. But before he met Persephone, Hades had a lover named Minthe, a nymph who lived by the river Cocytus. However, when Hades fell madly in love with Persephone, Minthe was cast aside. Some say that when Persephone headed to the surface to spend the spring and summer with her mother, the nymph Minthe would not leave the ruler of the underworld alone. But when Persephone returned, Hades would run straight into her arms, leaving the greenish nymph abandoned. Minthe went on to brag that she was the most beautiful entity in the underworld, as even Hades could not resist her charms. These claims made Persephone furious. The queen of the underworld would not let such an insult to her honor go unpunished. Persephone turned the nymph into a plant known as mint. Mint was a plant used in funerals in ancient Greece. One of the reasons was that the aroma masked the odor of the deceased. Therefore, the plant personified by the nymph Minthe became forever bound to her lover's domains.